Hello and welcome to this presentation on awakening to the magic of ancient Egypt. If we have not met before, my name is Frances Billinghurst. I'm the creatrix of the Mystical Soul Academy, and I'm coming to you from Ghana country. As such, I acknowledge the Ghana people of the Adelaide Plains as being the traditional custodians of the lands upon which I reside. This presentation I offered live early September, and because it was so longer than what I anticipated, I thought when I was going to re-release it and make it public, I would really re-release it in at least 2 parts. So we'll see how we go. So this is part 1. There's part 2, maybe part 3, depending on where I sort of end things. So I do hope that you enjoy this presentation. It is PowerPoint, so I'm just going to call up my screen. And as such, I would like to start with a quote while the screen is loading. And this quote actually comes from The Lord of the Rings. The world has changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that once was is lost. For now, none live who will remember. So if you are watching this, no doubt, like me, you have a drawing to the land of the pharaohs. And it seems like many of us today are really feeling this pull, even if we don't really understand it. Could it be that we are beginning to tap into something on a deeper subconscious level? Something that may have been buried in our subconscious and our conscious awareness, as such the Lord of the Rings quote suggests. Maybe we are starting to recall a memory from a distant time. Maybe it is that, like the shifting sands of Egypt, there is deeper awareness or even potentiality that we are beginning to dream into. Whatever the reason, there's definitely something at play, or at least so I feel. Egypt has been something, or a land that I have been fascinated with, I don't know, for most of my life, if not all of my life. It's long held a fascination with me. However, it's taken some 30 odd years for me to eventually get there. And when I did, I was absolutely blown away. And in the process of unpacking those experiences that I'm still doing many years later, and looking at more of the new evidence coming to light and more of the different interpretation, shall we say, I'm beginning to sort of question, query, ponder, and this is part of my pondering. And from the outset, I just want to point out I'm not an archaeologist. I don't have any qualifications when it comes to interpreting the mysteries of ancient Egypt, save for a lifetime of interest, personal interest. I also tend to have a relatively logical mind. However, this is open to the mysteries. And I am also aware that there are things that I would say are simply beyond our current reality or awareness level, or even level of understanding. So with all that in mind, when I found myself standing before the pyramids on the Giza plateau, exploring the king's chamber with its highly polished walls, almost in direct contrast to that of the so-called queen's chamber, when I was pondering these ginormous granite boxes in the Serapeum at Saqqara that were cut with such precision that they looked like they were done by lasers. or even wandering through some of the temples like this one at Dundera with their 3,000 plus years of artwork, of the hieroglyphs on the walls, on the ceilings, and carved into stone. Needless to say, I came away with more questions than answers. This, I believe, is part of this awakening to the magic that is ancient Egypt. It is encouraging us to question our take on reality, on the history that we have been told, on the narrative that we have been led to believe about mankind. Now, I don't want to sort of venture down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, but it is in this openness now that I think Egypt presents us with the what ifs, because it's challenging our perception on the things that may have even been so carefully shaped and molded into a way that can enhance one train of thought over another. And even what the archaeologists have long told us about ancient Egypt has actually been through the lens in which the world has been shaped, and one that for the last 2,000 years at least has never truly been questioned, let alone challenged. And I say that because in particular the pyramids, being still today referred to as tombs, these are the pyramids of Giza, that connection stems from Plutarch, who was Greek, who came in, I think, around about the 3rd century BCE, long after the reign of the pharaohs, of the high king, at a time when Egypt had already or long been, I know Greekified is not a word, maybe it is a word, but the ancient Egyptian way of living was no longer in existence, at least in those areas. Yet, and also Plutarch came from a sort of a Greek mindset, saw things through his Greek lens of society, of capability, of history. Yet we take his view as if they were carved in the stones of the temples, and no one has challenged or inquired why. Well, there have been some, but these are often discredited. And it's not just ancient Egypt. We've seen, and I can't reach her book, but Mary Giboltus, who was an archaeologist, feminist archaeologist back in the could be 50s, 60s. Could have been a little bit later, a little bit earlier, I can't remember off the top of my head. But in her excavations throughout Western Europe, when she was discovering all these feminine iconology, statues, symbolism, it took a while, many decades, for them to finally be recognized due to the belief held at the time that women or the divine feminine didn't exist or couldn't create such things, that there was always the sort of masculine male god. And it sort of challenged the belief system at the time, especially the Western belief system at the time, of the divine being masculine, when all these feminine images kept appearing. So the choice is ours. Which pill are we going to take? It's almost like that we are now Neo from the Matrix movie. So we have the choice of two. We have the choice of the blue pill, which will show us, when allow us to just go along with what the Egyptologists have long instructed us, about ancient Egypt, or we can take the red pill, where we dive down the potentiality that there is a deeper understanding that occurred outside and beyond what the official viewpoint that is within mainstream archaeology in our textbook, what we're being taught. The so-called red pill thought can be seen within the thread that runs throughout other ancient civilizations, and it's one that begs the question to be asked. What if we, modern day life, what if we've got it all wrong? What if we got it all wrong about our species, our history, our own evolution? How would we cope if the threads that are holding together the tapestry of our current reality start to unravel? How would you cope? And maybe this is a thought that keeps some of us stuck in the past. However, increasingly, we know that there is a change happening. We can see it all around us. In particular, we're seeing like the familiar way of doing things is breaking down. It's beginning to dissolve. It's like it's simply not working anymore. And there's more and more people finding their voices, finding their strength, rising up, speaking out. Yet there are still those stuck in their old worldview of telling us that any change will bring about destruction, the end of the world. And for a while, we've all believed this narrative. However, now we're beginning to question, realizing, remembering that the only destruction that is being brought about is this state of this patriarchal mindset. By patriarchy, I mean the power over, the control, the suppression of another, even to the entitlement of a few. And again, when we turn our attention back to places like ancient Egypt, for example, we can see that what we are possibly going through is merely a cycle within cycles. And this is something that Indigenous peoples have been telling us. We bother to listen. It's something that is clearly found in Egypt, carved on the stone walls of the temples, almost as a reminder that has spanned the aeon, has been left to us from the ancient past, instructions to help us navigate these cycles. And these two images here on the right is from a papyrus of the Dundera calendar, or the circular Dundera calendar. The actual Dundera calendar that was on the temple ceiling is in the Louvre. What you see at Dundera is a resin copy, but it shows us cycles within cycles. Then at Abydos, behind Abydos temple, to the mysterious Assyrian, there is a tunnel where this image can be found, and it's a bit hard to sort of take a photograph of it to the angle, but we see arising up this bark. And on this bark is Caffrey, the dung beetle, the scarab beetle, and he's holding the sun. And he is connected with the sun. He is connected with regeneration, transformation, rebirth. And he is the new sun that rises at dawn each day. And here he is guarded by the natives, the gods. Again, indicating that there are cycles within cycles. And while we might be at an end of one cycle, we're not at the end. There will be a new cycle stepping into that we will all step into. And what I find really interesting is some of the quotes from scientists. Now, Albert Einstein, I don't know if he actually said this quote. I couldn't find a source, save for that it stems from Ram Dass's work. So it might have been an interpretation of Albert Einstein, but it's very interesting. It says, I didn't arrive at my understanding of the fundamental laws of the universe through my rational mind. The reason I find it interesting is that it reflects the quote of renowned German physicist and Nobel laureate Max Planck, who went on to say that science cannot solve the ultimate mystery of nature. And that is because in the last analysis, we ourselves are part of nature, and therefore part of the mystery that we are trying to solve. So I guess we should just simply sit back and align ourselves to the fact that science cannot prove everything. We need to get out of our rational minds and begin to open up our awareness, if Einstein's quote is correct, our awareness to something that can only really be found deep within us, that ember of the magic that Egypt had and continues to be the guardian of. And this may not be easy. I know, as I've said, I have a very, or rather, logical mind. I like facts and figures. This is evident trying to find out where Einstein's quote actually came from. Yet, for a reason, I'm also very much drawn to magic, to the occult, which simply means the hidden. I'm drawn to the mystery, to the potentiality. I believe that there's more to us than this physical body and this physical existence. And I'm constantly balancing my logical left, fact-seeking brain with my magical, seeking, mystery, enduring feelings, right brain. And this could be my personal journey with ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians didn't separate things as we do today. They had a different, more metaphysical approach. They wove metaphysical concepts throughout their own reality. The gods, for example, were more than what we would call God today as divine beings. To the ancient Egyptians, they were referred to as the Netta, the Neteru, the immortal ones, for they were considered to have stood before or even beyond the parameters of time and space, who were also beyond all continuance. They were the reflections of the unseen as spirit. The Neteru were seen as essences or forces of nature, even embodiments of nature, the natural world around us, as well as being principles of time and consciousness. And ancient Egyptians had a netta, or magic, or the principle or essence of magic, and he was known as Heka. And one way, I guess, of understanding ancient Egyptian magic is to look at what their contemporaries wrote about them. Although this quote at the top from the Tamils was written around about the 3rd to the 6th century of Common Era, comes a lot later than what we would consider the expansive nature of ancient Egypt culture. It does, however, highlight how ancient Egypt or the ancient Egyptian knowledge was seen from the outside. The quote, 10 measures of magic have come into the world. 9. Well, Egypt received 9 of these. The rest of the world, 1 measure. So 9 aspects, measures of magic alone went to Egypt. And that quote, I should mention, it comes from Robert Craig Richard's book, Mechanics of Ancient Egyptian Magical Practice, which sort of forms much of the foundational material in this presentation. And I will link to this book in the comments below. The images on the screen, we have Heka as a child. He's wearing the hem crown. He's carrying a flail. And he also is depicted carrying even an ankh or a scepter. And this scene in the middle is from the temple of Neith and Khnum. And it's with the king presenting the jewel crowns, the white crown and the red crown of Upper and Lower Egypt to Heka, again in this child form. So when it comes to ancient Egypt, what we have is at least 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years of continuous history of culture, a culture that believed in magic, probably more. Unlike how we perceive magic to be today, the ancient Egyptians saw no difference between magic, religion, medicine, science, or anything else. Magic was the order of the universe. And this is important to consider because when we talk about magic today, we tend to compare it to either science or religion. For example, if we question whether magic is real, whether it would change our reality, we're actually comparing it to science. If, however, we query or question about the entities that are involved in magic, whether magic itself sort of stems from, say, God-given miracles or demonic sorcery, then we're comparing it to religion. And while this is quite a sensible and intuitive way of constructing inquiries, especially from our modern perspective, that is the point. We're doing it from our modern eyes, our modern understanding. And in such, it has its flaws, as I mentioned earlier with Plutarch, writing about the pyramids. Almost at the demise, the end of the Egyptian empire or culture. And this is because of possible biases that we have, not to mention that the context may have been translated completely differently when specific cultural frameworks are applied. And again, we see this especially in colonialization, where, put simply, majority of people who went out, say, from England or France or Spain, were Christian, had Christian mindsets. So when they came to other countries like Africa or the Bahamas or Polynesia, and they witnessed different, should we say, ritual spiritual practices, they couldn't cope. They labeled it as witchcraft, as sorcery. Was it? Wasn't it? We don't know. Could it be something completely different? Could it be like the ancient Egyptians? They didn't divide, separate this concept of magic from religion. But we do, and we've had centuries, millennia of that indoctrination, that separation. And this again shapes how we see the past. And one of these sort of cultural frameworks we need to keep in mind is that the ancient Egyptians, as far as we are aware, and again, we're looking at the past from modern eyes and understandings, and we use things like the archaeological evidence and everything else. So again, it is based on perception. But the evidence tends to reflect that the ancient Egyptians saw not only their world and cosmos as magical, but there was this magical element relating to how they interacted within it. So coming back to the ancient perception of Netta for magic, Heka, like all the other Neteru, as I said, they were perceived to be more than what we consider God, a divine being, is today. Likewise, our perception of magic doesn't quite fit in to what the ancient Egyptians believed to have seen or perceived it as. And a good example of this is the hieroglyph for Heka, which we see here in the middle. It has the upward hands, which is known as Ka. And Ka is one of the 9 parts of the soul in ancient Egyptian teachings. It relates to sort of the astral self. It's also referred to as life force. And these raised and open arms is almost like being open to the source of power or energy that comes from the cosmos. And then we have the sort of intertwisting ribbon, almost like the double helix of the DNA strands. Almost like the Eastern teachings, the yogic teachings, the movement of life force, the Pangala and the Ida. And as they cross, as they move up the body, this is where the chakras, the energy centers, are located. And all of this makes sense when we realize that Heka, sometimes referred to as Heku, was considered to be the divine force that existed within the universe. It was like a power or a strength that could be personified as a god. Yet this force, this magic, embodied not only the god, but all gods, all the Neteru, as well as humans and other aspects in the universe. And on the left, we see Heka holding 2 snakes. Snakes were also connected in with life force energy. We know it's Heka because one of his symbols, his headdress, is the rear end of the lion. I don't know why it's the rear end of the lion, but if you do, put it in the comments below. I'd be really interested in knowing. And what we'll see in the next slide is one of Heka's role is to stand at the bow of Ra's spark, his boat, as it goes into the afterworld, the netherworld, the duat, the nighttime, and protect the bark and Ra, the sun god, from evil spirits. And these snakes also represent evil spirits. So they're dual in the interpretation. This other image here, we see Heka as the child again, sitting on a crook. He's sitting in front of Tahuti, Toph, who is depicted with his sacred writing instruments, and he is behind the lion. So when it comes to Heka, what is Heka? There are basically three interpretations within ancient Egyptian constructs. The first is that it refers to the Netta, who have been sort of introduced to, called Heka, who is the god or Netta of magic. It can also refer to the magical power itself, which seems to be some kind of mystical force that is infused throughout the world and also all things in the world. And Heka is also connected with magical spells and rites and the ceremonies that the ancient Egyptians performed. As I mentioned earlier, how the ancient Egyptians viewed magic is different to how we see it today. It was not perceived as some kind of supernatural thing. It was very much part of the natural order of life. It was not only the universe and how the universe worked, but also how it came into being. There was also a religious element to the practice of magic. It was this intercession of the Neteru, the gods, that made the magic more useful and more powerful. Magic was considered to be closely related to speech, to saying the right words, and it was Heka, the Netta, who imbued the words with magic, with this universal energy and power. All of this was Heka. And what I think I might do, I might just stop here and give you something to sort of think about. And then you can join me for part 2. I'll put the link to Risha's books below for you. Listen.